Hi, my name is Sarah Audsley, and I'm at the Taconic Mountains Ramble State Park in Hubbarton, Vermont, and it's Vermont's newest state park. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the Vermont Humanities Council and the Vermont State Parks for sponsoring this program. And I also would like to thank the Vermont Arts Council for a creation grant last year, which helped fund the writing of some of these poems for my manuscript in progress. When my mother returns as X. When my mother returns as X, she multiplies herself to be every single living thing, a cloud of butterflies, 6 calves grazing in the field beyond the pine, grass bending to the wind's steady pressure. She's a swarm of bees seeking the dust of golden pollen hidden in the cups of poppies. She's an X, marks the spot where she made me, the hand that never fed me, imprinting my DNA a second time. She's a white moon tipped over, brimming with milk for a body that's not there. She multiplies herself to be every form, the breeze lifting the white curtain, a pink silver-edged cloud expanding, the night coming on. When my mother returns, she's the bitter in my mouth I can't dilute. She swells inside. She's the branch from which birds will never fly. I grew up in Woodstock, Vermont, and I'm a Korean adoptee. I was adopted when I was 5 months old and came to the U.S. and spent my whole life in rural Vermont and also in New Hampshire. I lived in New Hampshire for 10 years. I feel deeply connected to the natural landscape and also feel like I deeply belong in rural landscapes. This poem is envisioning a creation myth. Greenhousing. I'll push against. What did you say? Any edge. An orchid cannot impregnate itself. Stamen and pistil sound like dirty words, but they're necessary. I know how to push against the glass. I was a seed. I was a sticky mess made from 2 bodies colliding, the way swells rise and fall, counting beats per second. Did she want him? Did he want her? Where did he put his hands when he made me? I know I can't ask such questions. I know my father tried to keep me after she died, but then he put me somewhere else where he thought he could remember where he left me. Gloved hands, dirty mouth. Greenery, potted things with roots and seeds, all must grow downward first before they burst. I grew up on 12 acres of my grandmother's farmland, and as well as 5 acres of land that my father was given, and in a log cabin that my father built with his brothers. I also grew up in the farming type landscape, so this poem describes both haying and also an incident with my younger brother, who's also adopted from South Korea. Swarm. When I left him standing there by a decaying log, mouth agape, no sound, still and shocked by the swarm of angry wasps propelling themselves out of the nest we'd hit with our bikes under the spruce on the east end of the property. It was a sun that slanted long and low at the edge of the pines. It was a soft breeze lifting the scent of grass, just mowed, drying in the distant field, waiting to be bound, made into rectangles, stacked. What can I do but pedal away faster? I don't look back, not once. You've got to make hay when the sun shines, say the old-timers. I make the hay sway. I make the wasps retreat back to their nest. Or I make him cry and wail. Rock beats scissors, scissors beats paper, paper beats rock. I let wasps beat up my little brother because I don't pull him away. I don't yell, pick up your bike. Run, my lungs load with panic, no release. Because I don't take his chubby hands, run with him towards the house to the stone steps, don't implore him to save himself. I see his face still puffy. Wasps sting again and again. They're the ones who won't die after just one stabbing. So they tickle him, they caress his skin, they stroke him like the breeze lifts leaves, makes shadows on the lemonade glasses set out for the men coming in from haying in the hot fields. Each glass glistens, the ice dissolving back into its original form, liquid pooling on the glass tabletop. It's true, the wasps found their way down his shirt. Later, we have to paint his back pink to cover up the redness, the blotchy raised welts. Later, we have to go back to get his bike, resting where he'd flung it on its side, pedals still. I should say about that poem is that my brother is fine. And we would go yard sailing and look for the long-stemmed spoons to stir in the lemonade. That was something I remember from my childhood.
So, Sarah, again, it is our pleasure. We are so excited to have had you with us as one of our Words in the Woods poets this year, but also to have this really unique and special opportunity to have this conversation with you a little bit about the themes that come up in your poems, your process, and also, I think you mentioned something that I'd really like to highlight, which is the space where you actually were and were reading at Taconic Mountain Ramble, which is our newest state park in Vermont. It's a beautiful, beautiful location. If folks haven't been there before, I'm very excited about going there for the first time. But what it really made me think of with reading your poems is that I got a sense that there was a lot in terms of the idea of place and what that means in terms that are very real and literal, and also that move into kind of the imagined. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about place and the role that plays in your poetry and how that comes across in these 6 that you chose to share with us.
I would say that I am a person very committed to place and someone who feels very connected to the rural landscape. I grew up on land that was my father inherited from his parents on 5 acres that was connected through a railroad bed that I could walk to my grandmother's property. That was a farmhouse, a working farm with the brown cows with white faces. And there's a poem called Swarm, which I read for the recording, that describes, the men coming in from haying in the hot fields. And my brother and I are both adopted from South Korea. So we were 2 of the only people of color in our small, town in Vermont. So I grew up both feeling very comfortable in the natural landscape and also deeply connected to it. So the idea of place is, for me as a poet, also connected to memory, in that both the physical reality of interacting with the natural landscape both as an adult and as a child figures into my work pretty prominently.
I felt like I was there with you in some of those poems, and then also the ones where you were describing other things, your family, your parents, and those experiences. I really felt it very deeply and identified with it a lot. And I just, was so impressed by that. And I'd love to hear more about how you come to that.
It started really young for me. I started writing poetry when I was in elementary school, and then wrote in high school, I think also to just deal with the teenage angst. And my parents were going through a divorce. And I think at that time, I hadn't really fully understood or grappled with what it was to contend with being a Korean American adoptee growing up in rural Vermont. And that it was only later, as in my late 20s, when I was 29, that I actually returned to writing, and that it was the thing that I always wanted to do, or the thing that I was born with, this compulsion to convey thoughts and feelings, emotions, memory, impressions, figurative language, associative thinking into poems. So yes, I think that the poems that I read for Words in the Woods do figure deeply with grappling with being a Korean American adoptee. There are both mother figures of, you know, the biological mother and the adoptive mother. The biological father appears as well as the adoptive father, and childhood memory, and I did need to feel like I did need to say a disclaimer that at the end of Swarm that my brother's fine, he's okay. I would love to say that I write every day, but I've gone through periods of both writing every day of being highly productive, and also periods of drought, of laying fallow and not writing on a daily basis. There's a process, a group that you can sign up for. It's called The Grind. And it's a daily writing practice where you get assigned, you sign up at the end of the month for the following month. And you commit to writing one new piece every single day, and you email it to your Grind group. And it's hard because you have to submit one new thing by midnight in whatever time zone you're in. And the Grind group is between like 8 and 10 people. So you're receiving those new drafts from other people into your inbox. And there's no commentary. It's just a generative tool. And so I've used that writing process in the past, and I have folders full of those Grind poems that I can go back in and dig around in and see if there's a gem or something, some line or some idea that I want to pursue. And actually, Field Dress Portal, one of the later poems in the recording, was originally a Grind poem. So it came from that daily process of, and it's also a practice poem. So it was a response to a painting that I fell in love with.
And going back to place and how it shows up in your work, I remember you once said imagined memory, and I found that really interesting. And I wanted to know, what is the difference between imagined memory versus unimagined when it comes to landscapes, and also like just reckoning with your own history?
When I figured out that being an adoptee is like the root cause of feeling displaced in the world, or feeling sense of not belonging, that once I figured that out, once I had that realization, it really helped. I think that each poem that I read for the recording, I've done a lot of internal work to craft those poems, in that contending with an emotional landscape. And I've had a mentor say that, you know, emotions, it's right here. An emotional state is an intellectual state, is, I guess, something I have near my desk. And that was Eduardo C. Corral. And when he said that to me, I was like, what? And he's like, Sarah, I'm going to say it again. An emotional state is an intellectual state. Because I did not grow up in the country of origin from which I came, I do have this relationship with this imagined landscape of Korea. And I have been there. I did go back in 2013. And I was able to meet my biological father, which was a very important part of me becoming who I am right now. And it is part of the manuscript that I'm working on. And I think that the poetic imagination allows us to dream and to imagine places we've never been to, but also it allows us to dip into memory and to craft the places where we've been, or the using like metaphor to allow us to approach place in a different way.
The next poem I'm going to read is called Field Dress Portal, and it appears in print in New England Review. And I just want to say that this poem is an ekphrasis poem, which means that it uses as a painting as a jumping off point. I consider myself a rural poet, and what I mean by that self-designation is that I claim belonging in the rural landscape, Vermont specifically, as a Korean American adoptee. Seeing someone like myself represented in a rural or wild landscape was not common when I was growing up. So I claim the pastoral, and this poem's speaker's identity is not disclosed, but it is important for the I, or the first person speaker in the poem, to take up the rural descriptions, to walk through the painting, to make my own portal of belonging with words. Field Dress Portal. Lauren Wood's field dress, 7 feet by 6 feet, oil on linen. A yellow orb shifts against the shock of dark vertical bark, her back split diagonal, flayed, and a bright fleshy suspension in the copse of trees. Her hooves scrape packed dirt, legs sway like she's dancing on hindquarters, and I could take her body inside me like the medicine I need, or wrap her skinned hide, congealed blood flaking, a cloak against the coming night. And I'd wear her ears, pin her white warning tail to my backside, as regalia for all the dear dead. But the painting only approaches her in 2D, a portal of slim brushstrokes, paint upon paint. So I step into the field from the left, outside the frame, push through tall burnished grasses, bending slightly, my feet crush crickets, trample late blooming goldenrod, and I let the heat of the day leak out of the air like a balloon popped and swirling, so I can become field dress portal. What's the worst possible thing to ask of yourself? Maybe believing in whatever demands on your own inner life, like how love is supposed to save even the most hardened ones. Only this dead doe's head bows and whistles to the others, come find me, quick like light, or like all the seed pods' sudden dispersal, their unrealized progeny float away without a care for the end result. I'm standing in front of a really beautiful spot. It's called the Japanese Garden. And I just wanted to say something about that I am not actually Japanese. I'm a Korean American adoptee. These places are lovely and beautiful, and they also make me think about appropriation and cultural appropriation and how we as a country bring in East Asian cultures into our landscape and into our environment. And this is not necessarily a criticism of the state park. It's beautiful, and I invite you all to come here. I grew up with white parents in Woodstock, Vermont, and I only preface that because this poem refers to my father, and he was in the Vietnam War, and the title is Lament for Some Other Saigon. My father taught me, feet are something to care for, cradle. He won't talk about his time in Nam. I remind people his age too much of hot, sticky green foliage flapping in their faces, or steam rising up from rice paddies. The platoons waded through all morning, crossing in the open, barrels loaded, sighted, ready for a fight. Yellow, roses, that is what they sent home to their wives to dry in glass vases. My face, a big yellow moon rises in their nightmares. My face, a howling monkey, a ripe watermelon rind, grinning back at them. Or perhaps it's my hair that troubles them, black braid bouncing with the rocking, the movements of the swing. Whose hand could sear its own shape on my skin? My skin will turn to crisp brown under any sun. My eyes will holster any loaded rifle. My father is an ant moving through tall grasses, boots filling with mud and muck. He never talks about anything else. He's the slap of the wind hitting my face. His yellow balloon silence is what fills the room, but I'm the air taking up the space between his ribcage. A face like mine walks among others in his dreams.
The poem Lament for Some Other Saigon imagines my adoptive father in Vietnam and contending with, being a soldier in that war. And I imagine the landscape as with rice paddies and people like the platoons walking through these rice paddies, which in and of itself is a stereotype of the landscape. And sometimes I'm nervous about that poem because I'm putting my American lens onto this landscape, but it's basically about my father and him having an Asian child, him having been to Vietnam, probably very likely have killed Vietnamese people coming back to the US. And then it was what underlies that poem actually is when I was a child, it was probably middle school. I had a friend whose father was also in that war. And my friend said that her father was wondering how my father was dealing with having an Asian child. And so there's a line in that poem about, how my face is a big yellow moon rises in their nightmares. So it also refers to the face that I carry that could be haunting American GIs who went to Vietnam. And so in that way, place becomes both there's like the physical reality of the face, but then there's the imagination that takes over in the poem itself.
Living here in Vermont, which is a place that is very racially homogenous, as similarly as a woman of color, I am not Asian American. I'm an African American woman from the American South, and so my experience is very different. But I'm curious to know how it might have figured into the way that you craft your identity or allow your identity to be shown through these poems, through the ways that you have been literally seen in Vermont and New England. I know you lived in New Hampshire also, with people who do not either take the time or know what different folks of Asian descent look like. And so from like the point of view of just vision and quick glances, what people are projecting onto you. I thought that was really interesting. I wondered if you'd like to speak to any of that.
So yeah, there's this phrase called being read and what it means to be read. And thank you for reading me so well, Rachel, and for being so perceptive and generous also with your reading. And for poets, particularly I will go out on a limb and say poets of color who write in the autobiographical mode, where the speaker is so close, or the reader assumes that the speaker is so close to the poet, to the person. Being read, the term being read is very intimate, and as readers, we lean into vulnerability. And so I'm committed to that, I guess, in my work. And I think that, I have to be okay with being read, because when things get published, that they are in the public realm now, and something that is personal and private and conveys, some, minor traumas here and there, or lived experience, when that moves from the private, from the diary entry, from the journaling to the public realm, then that creates, I think it creates a conversation. And because I grew up with white parents and I grew up in a very white homogenous community as a singular face, I always feel like I belong everywhere until I'm told, or until I'm put in a situation where I am told I'm not, or where I'm made to feel like I don't belong everywhere. So it is very odd psychologically to feel like I'm white, or that or like that I'm supposed to be passing as white. And it's because I grew up in very white spaces and was always told I could excel or do what I wanted to do. But I have had experiences where, you know, people have come up to me and be like, "Oh, your English is so good," and I'm like, "What?" And I have also gotten the questions of, "Where are you from?" From people in Vermont have asked me, "Where are you from?" And I'm like, I'm from here. I'm from your state. And I'm from Vermont. And I also have thought recently about the terms of flatlander versus woodchuck. And there was I think there was like a Vermont edition on those two terms that came out sometime earlier this spring or summer. And I realized that, you know, I always felt like I belonged in the Vermont landscape and that I made fun of flatlanders because I grew up in a town where has an influx of tourism and the leaf peepers and all of that. And it's like nice to joke about the people coming in from out of town to enjoy Vermont's natural landscape. But I realized recently that it's just xenophobic, and it creates it's language that is actually othering, and it's nice it's really nice if you're on the side that's making the joke, right? But if you're on the other side of it, that's not fun. And it just feels like, oh, like, you know, it's a common joke to be like, you have to be like 5-generation Vermonters. You have to like have been here for so long and have, you know, multiple generations and like, you know, and I actually think that that's very not very healthy at all. And I hope like we're changing that.
Like it feels so subtle, like something like Flatlander, but it's just like really off-putting to meet people for the first time. And like, you already have a title that has a, you know, connotation. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think Flatlander is probably the nicest slur that I've gotten since I've been here in Vermont. I'm just going to go there and say it. And like, thank you so much for saying that and sharing, Sarah, that you had that experience that was unifying with what many Vermonters do, which is other people that they perceive to not be from here. And sharing that anybody can be on the side of the oppressor, anyone. And it doesn't matter what your identity is. And it is a way of building camaraderie with others. And so I really was struck by that. And I'm
definitely guilty of that. Like I've made fun of people who like are from out of town, or for people who like don't like, you know, just coming in for, you know, getting their Vermont experience. And I, you know, I'm not. So basically I have been an oppressor, you know, like I've been a part of those languages and those terms. And I'm, you know, realizing more and more that it's not okay. And it creates, it's not humane, and it's not something I want to perpetuate. And also, you know, having let's unpack it. Let's have a conversation about what those terms actually do. Besides like, create a laugh for the people that are on the side of finding it funny.
Well, you never really had a choice in where you ended up, like from the get-go. So like that, you're here because of othering, but then at the same time, like that othering is also associated with love and nurture and, you know, community, and like trying to investigate that. Sometimes like you couldn't have been anything but a poet.
Yeah, I know. It's yeah. It came with being born, I guess, you know, and all the complications of adoption and transracial adoption. So yeah, the argument of my book, the argument of the poetry collection I'm working on, is that the speaker, i.e. me, would not love the landscape, would not love the woods, would not talk about goldenrod, would not, you know, be talking about the men coming in from haying in the hot fields if I hadn't been adopted specifically to Vermont or specifically to a rural landscape. Like that's the argument of the book and basically of my life. You know, like I wouldn't love the woods or want to be in landscapes where there's more trees than people if I hadn't been adopted to by my parents who live in Vermont. And also just, you know, having developed an affinity for our place, our state.
I'm curious why you use the word argument. Is it that you just said the argument of my life? I just found that fascinating.
I think it's because in writing and in my training, we talk about sometimes how a poem can be an argument for a stance, or for, you know, for love, for against love, or for beauty, or so I'm using that term more as like literarily, but I don't think we should have to argue for our lives, or for our place in the world, or for access to rural landscapes, or access to woods and clean water and places where we can feel free. And that's, at the end of the day, I live where I live because this is where I feel the most free.
This poem was originally a crown of sonnets, which I had deconstructed and now appears in long lines. And it's a meditation on the color yellow. Crown of yellow. If I stay, I might notice things, the color of buttercups, their bright faces en masse floating in green grass clouds, the lolling fields. Butter browned in a pan for the sauce to dress an expensive dead fish. Yellow yolks make cake, custards, or the exact shade for stasis. Or shame. I always think of yellow so. A primary color, it arrives in packages, crushed natural iron oxide from a quarry in France. Combine yellow with red, make orange. Shades shift by proportion. The painter tells me about the color wheel, not the gray fierce sphere spinning in my head, or anything I know something about. The beehive above swaying, yellow bits move in and out. How yellow the yellow finches' bodies, how they lift so easily into the air. It is the in-between color. Traffic lights say, stop, then go. The striking of a single ray of sunlight can cause cancerous cells to grow, mutate. Paint the kitchen walls a shade of yellow, warms and comforts. Color of the piss puddle I left on the hardwood floor, little ballerina shoes tiptoed around the mess. I did raise my hand. I did ask to go. I did try to do the right thing. Tutus and twirls. Mrs. Stein said, wait, hold it. Her black leotard plastered to the curvature of her small breasts rose with her commands. If you prefer gold fillings and can afford them, the dentist will place them inside decayed teeth. Gold is a soft metal. Combine yellow with blue, make green. Are we back in the field yet? Why do I ever leave it? The forest needs no grammar. Water splits rock. Hawk shreds yellow bird's feathers. The mind an unending sieve. Dandelion wine is made from the tufts of yellow heads collected and boiled. Alcohol is made for adults. Some bitter root. Never dress Asian babies in yellow, my mother tells me, clashes with their skin. I learned from you, she says. And there's a fox running the median line on the bumpy road. I am not there yet, but I'm driving fast, headlights off, because there is a full-bodied yellow moon, and I want to move in the dark like I know exactly, know precisely, without any hesitation where I am going, barreling ahead. Each hour the light changes, each minute the angles shift. Skylights are key in the studio, naked, put on my skin in yellow layers. How many? What can the painter see? I prefer to sleep through sunrise. I trust the heliocentric turning of things that are difficult to understand. About yellow face, I cannot say enough. What is enough? The channeling knife is a tool to make a lemon twist. I use it, hovering over the glass. Making the cut infuses the air in the space above the liquid with the essence of the fruit. Once I plucked an entire bucket of lemons and lavender, made lemonade. I don't believe in that phrase, because my mother took to the tug of the bottle. Vomit is often yellow. In another dream, I am the lone sunflower swaying, shaken by the anticipation from the smell of the oncoming distant rain.